Order. Order. We now move on to the next debate. I'll call Kevin Brennan to move the motion, and I will then call the Minister to respond. Unfortunately, there won't be an opportunity for the member in charge, Mr. Brennan, to wind up, given the convention for 30 minutes debate, which I'm sure honourable members will be aware of. Order, order. Kevin Brennan to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pritchard, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd also like to welcome the Minister to her new position, and I hope that she'll bring some real energy and intent in the job. The broad subject of today's debate on British nationals detained overseas is one that's gained a substantial focus both in this place and in the media in recent weeks, and I felt it was important to seek an opportunity to highlight the stories of those constituents detained overseas and keep their names at the forefront of the minds of ministers and of the media. And like all colleagues across the House, I was delighted to see Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ashouri reunited with their families once again. Their hard-fought return to the UK is testament to the unwavering love and untiring efforts of their families. And I completely agree with my honourable friend, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, that such cases deserve proper scrutiny so that lessons can be learned for the future from the handling of cases of arbitrary detention by authoritarian regimes across the world. And on that basis, I am very pleased that the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Mr. Pritchard, has launched an inquiry into hostage-taking and hope that they will look at other cases than the ones we've heard about during the hearings. I will give way briefly.
He's very right to touch upon the dreadful story that we all watched unfold of Nazara Zaghari-Ratcliffe has shown the desperate straits that many families go through privately and what lessons have been learned by our consulates and by the FCDO regarding the importance of government pressure and intervention at an earlier stage. Perhaps maybe if it had been done earlier, maybe the lady would have got home earlier.
Well, as ever, I think the honourable gentleman's intervention is both compassionate and pertinent, and I'll go on in my remarks to say something about the way that the government handles these cases. And it really is the case that the momentum that has been gained has to be maintained and used by ministers to redouble their efforts to reunite other British nationals in similar positions and their families. And I will give way a couple of times briefly to colleagues who I know might want to mention briefly individual cases. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He will know that I'm the Member of Parliament for Anousheh Ashouri, who was also released with Nazanin. And would he agree with me that it's really important to really keep the profiles of people that are detained in other countries right there in front of the government's attention? Because I truly believe that because of all the campaign work that was done for Nazanin's release and Anousheh's release, it really did cause the government to eventually respond and to do the right thing in the end.
Yes, look, I don't underestimate the complexities of this and how difficult it is for government tactically to approach these sorts of cases, but she's absolutely right. I think that where the families want their loved ones to be remembered and highlighted, that's exactly what should happen. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Debate. I wonder if he now would agree with me with the Prime Minister leaving to go to the Republic of India. It's now the time of the Minister in summing up in answers to him, but also confirm that Jagtar Singh Johal is now arbitrarily detained by Indian authorities.
Well, I'm sure the Minister will have heard what he said and will want to respond in her summing up to that remark. But it is important when the Prime Minister does visit overseas countries and meet with their leaders that he highlights as a priority these sorts of cases. I think the honourable gentleman wants to give way.
I thank my friend for giving way. It's very kind of him. I wanted just to draw his attention to the case of Mehran Rouf, who is in jail in Iran. He's a trade union activist, and he was not released when others were released from Iran. The Foreign Secretary rather erroneously said that he didn't want his name to be made public. It's been absolutely clear through his family to Amnesty International they do want his name to be public, they do want a public campaign, and they do want him to be released in the same way that the very welcome release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe took place.
Yes, and my honourable friend has highlighted, quite rightly, that and made that name public in his intervention, which I'm sure will have achieved what he wanted to do. And there are other cases, of course. Mr. Pritchard Morad Tabaz and Mehran Rauf, who we've heard mentioned, that 2 other British Iranians whose arbitrary imprisonment continues despite the recent negotiations, and also British citizen Jimmy Lai, who's being held in solitary confinement in Hong Kong under the dystopian national security law. But the story I want to primarily tell today, however, is one of my constituents, my 30-year-old constituent Luke Simons, who's been held without charge or trial by the Houthis in various prisons in Sana'a in Yemen since 2017. Like many people in Cardiff, Luke has a Yemeni family background owing to the seafarers who settled around the city's maritime thriving docklands in the late 19th and early 20th century. By 1914, Mr. Pritchard, the Yemeni population of Cardiff represented one of the 2 largest Muslim communities in Britain and continues today to constitute a proud and vibrant part of Wales's capital city's diverse population. Now, Luke, in exploring his religious and cultural roots, travelled to Yemen, where he met his future wife, Tagreed, a Yemeni national, in 2014, and in 2016 they had a son together. When the civil war started in Yemen, shortly after Luke's arrival in the country, leading rapidly to the overthrow of the Yemeni government, he found himself caught in the middle of a violent conflict, which came to involve military intervention from regional powers, including Saudi Arabia. Now, Luke and his wife tried to flee to safety, to come back to the UK via neighbouring countries. They did manage to get to Djibouti, but didn't get the support at that time they needed from the UK authorities to be able to travel to Britain, and had to return to Yemen, very sadly and unfortunately. And it was following this that in April 2017, Luke was detained at a Houthi checkpoint in Yemen upon discovery that he held a British passport. Now, in the ensuing 5 years, Mr. Pritchard, despite numerous promises from Houthi and Yemeni officials and talks between regional authorities, between UK foreign secretaries, and a visit to the prison by the UK special envoy to Yemen, Luke has remained incarcerated. And as the Minister will know, in October 2020, it did appear as though Luke might be included in a substantial UN-supervised exchange, which consisted of more than 1,000 prisoners. Following extensive negotiations and logistical planning for Luke's release, with arrangements also being made to ensure safe passage for his wife and child, the Foreign Office say that Luke's captives inexplicably broke with the agreement and severed lines of communications with the UK government at that time. And obviously, that was devastating, Mr. Pritchard, for Luke's family, who watched helplessly as other foreign nationals, including some from the United States, were returned home by their governments from captivity in Yemen. And since then, there's been very little outward progress on Luke's case. Occasionally, his family has been allowed to communicate with him via telephone. They've become increasingly concerned and distressed by his poor physical health, exacerbated by the notoriously squalid conditions of his captivity and the ongoing COVID pandemic. And there's also concern about a lack of access to medical attention for Luke. More recently, I understand that his wife, Tagreed, has been informed by Houthi officials that the visits that she'd been able to make have been suspended. But perhaps most notably of late, Luke's grandfather, Bob Cummings, who is my constituent also, who along with other family members has campaigned persistently and courageously for Luke over the years, has told me of his worsening mental health and diminishing spirit. Luke's isolated, he's alone in his cell without being allowed outside, he's deprived of contact with any other prisoners, and sometimes not even aware what day of the week it is. The telephone conversations he's had with his family in the UK, which have been few and far between, have been supervised by his captives and are cut off after very short periods. And I would take this opportunity to appeal directly to his captives, because after all, they are responsible for his incarceration ultimately, to release this innocent young man who has no part to play in the conflict that's ongoing in Yemen, so that he can be reunited with his family and return to the UK. Now, clearly, other countries have had a lack of diplomatic presence in the country. It's quite often cited by the Foreign Office as a significant factor in limiting the UK government's influence and options for intervention in this case. And I do appreciate that it's very difficult when dealing with what is not really a traditional government of any kind in relation to the Houthis. But we have to note that other countries whose embassies are closed and are vacant in Sana'a, in Yemen, including the United States and France, have been able to secure the return of multiple citizens of their countries in the last couple of years. So it does ask and beg the question, if those countries are able to do it, why has the United Kingdom not been able to secure Luke's release? So I would ask the new Minister for the Middle East to make it clear to her officials that securing Luke's release during her time in office is a high priority, if not one of the highest priorities for her in her role. And I would ask her to commit to take a fresh look personally herself at Luke's case and, mastering the details of the case and giving her commitment that she will do everything in her power with all the energy she has to try and secure his release. I want her to redouble efforts to open channels of communications once again with the Houthis by whatever means, and to engage personally with her counterparts in France and in the United States to understand their recent successes in securing the release of prisoners from the Houthis. And as we enter the third week of the 2-month-long United Nations-led, brokered ceasefire, Mr. Pritchard, and the associated prisoner exchange negotiations that have been reported between the Houthi regime and the Saudi-led coalition, during this opportunity of the holy month of Ramadan, it's really vital that the UK government exhausts all options and uses its international influence, including via the United Nations, and quite frankly, its much boasted relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to explore every avenue to achieve Luke's release. This country's close ties with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are often controversial in this House because of that country's human rights record. But ministers, when pressed on this, are always quick to emphasize that it's a relationship that allows us to influence the Saudi regime. Why, therefore, was Luke's case not raised by the Prime Minister during his meeting with Mohammed bin Salman on the 16th of March, which, per the government press release, included discussions relating to concerns about human rights issues? So will the Minister undertake to speak with her Saudi counterparts to press them to include Luke's name in any prisoner exchange which may take place during the current ceasefire? Recent discussions have not convinced Luke's families that our diplomats are doing enough to leverage that much discussed relationship by ministers to press Luke's plight. Now, Mr. Pritchard, since Luke's arbitrary detention more than 5 years ago, the Minister will know that she's the 5th government minister appointed to the Middle East portfolio. There have also been 4 different foreign secretaries while Luke's been detained, including the current Prime Minister, including the member for South West Surrey, including the Deputy Prime Minister, and of course the current Foreign Secretary, all of whom have expressed support, but none of whom have actually met Luke's grandfather, despite extending meetings to the families of other British nationals in similar positions around the world. Luke comes from an ordinary working-class family in Cardiff. They don't have any special connections or friends in the media or anywhere else, but they deserve the same consideration and respect from this government as anyone else. And I ask the Minister to commit to Luke's family that she will raise this case with the Foreign Secretary at their next meeting and ask her personally to involve herself in this case, as she's done with others, and to take advantage, full advantage, of this latest but limited and time-limited opportunity to reunite Luke with his family. And I ask her to ask the Foreign Secretary to meet personally with Luke's family so that she can truly understand their plight. This incarceration, Mr. Pritchard, has gone on too long. I believe that with a prioritised and renewed diplomatic effort, using the current window of opportunity, Luke's release could be secured and he and his family could be reunited. And I implore the Minister to act now.
The question is that this House has considered British nationals detained overseas. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Pritchard, and it's a real pleasure to be serving under your chairmanship. And I'm also incredibly grateful to the Honourable Member for Cardiff West for securing this afternoon's debate and his tenacious support for his constituent, Luke Simmons. I want to return to Luke's case in a bit more detail shortly, and I'm also grateful to other honourable members for raising a number of different cases today. But I wanted to start actually by paying tribute to our consular staff and our diplomats who around the world are working tirelessly to meet the needs of vulnerable British people. There are around 5,000 British nationals who are arrested or detained overseas each year, and supporting them is a large part of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office's role. Our consular staff are contactable 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and they offer empathetic and professional support tailored, importantly, to every individual case. You know, our staff make no judgment about the innocence or guilt of those detained overseas. And as this debate has highlighted, and with the cases that have been raised, you know, they are often incredibly complex challenges to overcome. When British nationals are detained overseas, their health, their welfare and human rights are our top priorities. We provide information on the local prison system so that they understand how it works. Where relevant, we inform British nationals how to access medical treatment. We provide information on English-speaking lawyers and if there is a lawyer provided by the state so that they can have access to legal advice. We cannot interfere in the internal affairs of another country, including court proceedings. Our ability to provide consular assistance is also dependent on other states adhering to their own and international laws. We can and do intervene where British nationals are not treated in line with internationally accepted standards and where there are unreasonable delays in procedures. We take all allegations of torture or mistreatment very seriously. I will give way.
Very grateful for the Minister giving way. As we face threats to our peace and prosperity from autocratic states, it is vital that democracies and friends stick together, has said the Prime Minister. Therefore, what does the Minister wonder, given in issues in terms of detention or torture, that we agree we must not shrink from letting democratic friends know when they have fallen short in what we take to be shared values, especially around allegations of torture?
So, as I do say, and I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for his intervention and also his specific campaigning on behalf of his constituent. And as I say, we do take all allegations of torture and mistreatment very seriously. Where we do have concerns, and in his constituent's case, we take all kind of allegations of human rights violations seriously. And actually, ministers and senior officials have raised Mr Jahal's allegations of torture and the right to a fair trial with the government of India. And over 70 times the Foreign Secretary has raised it. Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon has raised it as well. We have kind of on a regular number of occasions raised it through officials too. But I also do know that he is kind of passionately campaigning on behalf of his constituents, and I know he raised this with the Prime Minister yesterday in the House. I will give way, but I will have to be quite brief because
grateful. She will be aware of the Karim Emrah case, husband of UK national who's my constituent, Jessica Kelly. And we campaigned to get him released from an Egyptian jail, human rights activist, but he's still been slapped by an asset freeze and travel ban. They are now separated, even though he has been released. And can I just appeal to her and her ministers to continue the work they're doing to get that ban off, the asset freeze and travel ban off, so they can be reunited.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for raising that particular case, and I'm happy to also kind of follow up with a written kind of follow-up following this debate. I would like to turn back to the case that the honourable member raised in terms of Luke Simons, who, as we've heard, has been held by the Houthis in Yemen without charge or trial since 2017. The Foreign Secretary and I are both very concerned about Luke's continued detention. I appreciate the anxiety and frustration felt by Luke and his family, and I'm personally monitoring the case very closely. The UK government continues to pursue all possible avenues to secure his release and reunite him with his wife and family. We have consistently raised this case at senior levels within the Houthi regime, but we do face a number of challenges. As the honourable gentleman mentioned, we have been unable to provide consular assistance to British nationals in Yemen since suspending embassy operations there in 2015. But this has not stopped us doing all we can to support Luke's family since 2017. And we continue to raise this case at the highest level with Houthi leaders, including through our ministers, ambassadors and the UN. On the matter of Luke's welfare, we share his family's concerns over allegations of mistreatment. We continue to raise with the Houthis, urging them to show compassion. We're also working closely with non-governmental organisations in Yemen who previously conducted a welfare check on our behalf. And we've also managed to secure a call between Luke and his family in January, and we will not stop working on his behalf until he's home in Cardiff, where he belongs. I just wanted to briefly touch on a couple of other areas in terms of the matter of prisoner exchanges. In October 2020, Luke was due to be released as part of a prisoner exchange, but the Houthis did not fulfil their commitment. This was despite using every lever possible to secure Luke's release, including drawing on the support of regional partners. We continue to engage with our partners to explore every possible avenue to get Luke home to his family. And also the honourable member's right to raise the issue of UN-mediated prisoner of war exchange. We understand that this involves only prisoners of war, and civilians are unlikely to be included in the deal.
That does concern me because although that is essentially true, it has been the case in previous instances that civilians have been included in this kind of exchange. My concern is that we are not using our influence with Saudi Arabia to ask them to include Luke in the names that they would like to see released, and that's a relationship we should be leveraging more in this instance.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his intervention. I think what I would say is that we are using every lever in our pack because, what we all want to see is we want to see Luke back in Cardiff, as I say. I'm also, other colleagues, we've heard and mentioned a number of cases of British nationals overseas, both in this debate and actually, I had another case raised by the honourable member for Louth and Horncastle. What I would say is that the FCGO and the team work as tirelessly to support British nationals detained overseas, and hopefully I've set out some of the areas in terms of how we can do this, because I think it's really important to say I really appreciate members' concern and support for their constituents. So let me conclude by thanking members for their concern and their efforts. I will give way.
thank the Minister for giving way very briefly. Could she assure the House that the government is in serious negotiations and talks with the government of Iran about the release of the Mohammed Roof that I mentioned, but others whose names are not revealed, but nevertheless are equally meritorious of being released?
So I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his intervention. As I say, we are in constant contact in terms of getting British nationals released, and I would happily follow up with him in writing following this debate. So I'd like to thank everyone, all colleagues, for their contributions today in terms of the cases we've heard about, and we will continue to tirelessly work on behalf of British nationals detained overseas, and in the case of Luke, to see him released and back in Cardiff, because that is, after all, what everyone wants to see. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered British nationals detained overseas. Many of that opinion say aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order. We now move on to the next debate. Move her in her place.